Hey everyone, how's it going? Today, we saddle up and get ready to ride, because today, we're going to talk about a crossover that, back in 2014, no one saw coming. A comic written by acclaimed director Quentin Tarantino, with comic book writer Matt Wagner, famous for creating the Grendel series, and at the time, writing Zorro for Dynamite Comics as co-writer, to help weave this tale of guns and blades. Of course, if you've been watching my previous videos, you know what that comic is. If not, I'll be happy to say it again. Django Zorro, the story where former Confederate slave turned fastest gun in the South meets with one of the inspirations that created heroes like Batman in both fact and fiction. Now, of course, before we get into it, we should discuss a little bit of our two main leads, for those who are unfamiliar with them. Starting with the gunslinging bounty hunter, Django Freeman. Tarantino came up with the character while actually working on a novel about film director Sergio Corbucci, an Italian film director who was famous for directing several spaghetti westerns that dived into the darker parts of American history and didn't shy away from brutal violence. This would give Tarantino the inspiration to do the same, and to honor the inspiration, he would name the film and its main character after one of Corbucci's most famous films, Django. And thus, 2012's Django Unchained was born, a film that takes place in 1850s America, where we meet Django, a slave who was separated from his wife after a failed attempt at escaping. He'd be sold off, but one fateful night, he would meet a former dentist turned bounty hunter, Dr. King Schultz, who would kill his captors and set him free. He'd help him find his wife, training him in the ways of a bounty hunter, all while on the way taking down slave owners, outlaws, and crooked sheriffs. Next to Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill, Django Unchained is probably one of Tarantino's most popular works. Not saying his other films before or after are bad, but Django definitely was one of those stories that really just stuck out, especially to Tarantino himself, since before this comic, there were other attempts to continue Django's story. Like originally he planned to do a sequel called Django and White Hell, but after some time, realized Django wouldn't work in this type of story, and the planned sequel wound up becoming 2015's Hateful Eight. And then there was the plan to at least continue Django's legacy by having one of his descendants be one of the main characters in a World War II film called Killer Crows, which would also tie in Django with his previous World War II film, Inglourious Basterds. But unfortunately, the film kinda ended up in development hell and just wound up not happening. But yeah, Tarantino was definitely not done with Django. Now that we've discussed the gun, let's move on to the sword. Inspired by the real-life vigilante Joaquin Murrieta, Zorro was created by John McCulley in 1919 in the pages of the pulp magazine All Story Weekly. And though there would be many different men and women to take the mantle of Zorro, there was always one that stand out the most: Don Diego de la Vega, a wealthy landowner who lived in California before it joined the United States. Sure, there have been alternate versions of Diego's history, like if he operated in the late 1700s or in the early 1800s, if he was the original Zorro or if there was a Zorro before him, and who exactly took his mantle of Zorro after he either retired or died in action. But in the end, the core element is still there. He fights for the people, rides a mighty steed named Tornado, and is a master of several forms of combat, though his preferred weapon of choice is the rapier. And as mentioned, Zorro would inspire many other heroes like Batman, and because Zorro is a public domain character, would have many interpretations in other forms of media by different companies. In fact, at the time of this video, we have two Zorro shows planned by Disney and Warner Brothers, one being focused on Diego on Disney Plus, while the other is a modern-day Zorro for the CW. But this version of Zorro is provided by Dynamite Comics, who, as I mentioned before, had a massive craze of pulp hero revivals like The Spider and The Shadow, and helped restore an interest in pulp heroes. But how do they fare with Django in this partnership with Tarantino? Well, let's get started. Warning, spoilers. We open in Arizona. We see a fancy-looking carriage traversing through the harsh landscape, but is stopped by someone who seems to be lost and in need of a ride. That person turns out to be Django, who luckily finds out that the owner is so kind to give him a lift, for it is revealed to be Don Diego de la Vega, who, like many of his, with a few exceptions, incarnations, started his life behind the mask long before Django, so is much older. But don't think that slowed him down. Things get interesting as we see a group of bandits ambush them in an attempt to rob the old Vega, but Django is quick to the draw and takes them out. Django has to apologize to Diego since their meeting was actually not a coincidence. The bandits he just killed were actually his latest bounty and saw him as an easy target for the bands to attack, so decided to use him as bait. However, Diego is not at all offended and actually hopes that Django will continue writing with him, hoping to learn more of his story. Django doesn't really see the harm in it, and so he agrees, and tells him his tale. This, however, winds up being somewhat of an interview, because then Diego offers Django a job in Phoenix, saying that he has business there that will involve some risk. Django at first isn't really sure since he's a bounty hunter, not a bodyguard, and Django has a wife to support. And like that, we got ourselves a partnership, and one that didn't start with them trying to attack each other because some misunderstanding. Seriously, it's pretty rare in crossovers. As for what the business is, it involves a man by the name of Gruco Langdon, or as he prefers to be called, the Archduke of Arizona, who I'm just gonna tell you right now is a son of a bitch. Like, I'll get more into it when I discuss characters, but yeah, he's a son of a bitch. From the name, you can probably guess that he's a very powerful man in the would-be state, and intend to keep it that way. How does he plan to do that? How will Django feel when he learns who Diego really is? And how will this story of guns and swords go? As you can tell, with this very brief story synopsis that you gotta read to find out. This comic is not just a great crossover, but also an amazing sequel to Django Unchained. You can tell that Tarantino just put his heart and soul in this story, as he did with the first film, while Matt Wagner absolutely kills it bringing his interpretation of Zorro into Tarantino's world. This take on Don Diego de la Vega fits perfectly with this kind of storytelling. However, there are some moments in the story where it does feel a bit more like an older version of Alejandro, the Zorro that Antonio Banderas played in his films. These moments aren't frequent, but noticeable enough that I thought I should bring it up, which is kind of understandable, as Tarantino made it very clear that he was very open on adapting this story into a film, and the adaptation would be a pseudo-sequel to Banderas' films, which really wouldn't be that hard. The comic could be used as a storyboard, and both Jamie Foxx and Antonio Banderas have shown interest in it. However, despite that, like Killer Crows, it's very unlikely to happen, but the comic alone is pretty solid. Moving on to characters, we of course gotta start with our main two characters, one of the coolest bounty hunters in cinema, and the legendary Fox, Django and Zorro. The two right from the beginning have an interesting dynamic, with Django immediately growing to like Diego, as he reminds him a lot of Dr. King Schultz, as much like his old mentor turned partner, he immediately treats Django with respect and kindness and doesn't judge him by his race. You also get the sense that Django has grown a little lonely since he no longer has his partner by his side after King's passing in the events of the first film, and his wife Hildy is all the way in Canada, which actually kind of bugged me when I first read that. Yeah, Hildy's appearance probably wouldn't do much for the plot, but still just feels kind of odd not to include her in the story in any way, especially since Django trying to save her was the driving force of the film. Like, maybe we could have had like a prologue of her in Canada, or a flashback on how Django and her have been doing as a couple since the film. I don't know, it just felt weird to me, but whatever, I'm getting off topic. Zorro, as I mentioned, is pretty on point for most of the story, and what you would expect from a seasoned Don Diego de la Vega. He's wise, quick-witted, with a silver tongue, and though older, is definitely not too old to fight and move in the shadows. The conversation the two have are my favorite parts of the story. Much like most of Tarantino's films, his dialogue-heavy scenes will often compete with his action scenes for best moments in the story, like in Inglourious Basterds and Kill Bill. Though, when it comes to the two working with each other on the field, it's no joke. I'll discuss that more when I get into art, but right now I'll just say that, yeah, this is definitely one of the best team-ups. Next, we'll discuss Zorro's loyal friend and brother-in-arms, Bernardo. Much like Zorro, there have been many takes on Bernardo, with this one being more akin to the version from Isabella Allandra's Zorro novels, where he's actually known Diego his whole life, and were practically raised together. Also, like most of his incarnations, he's a mute, but despite that, thanks to the art, you get to really understand his personality from just his facial expressions and actions. The only time he talks is in the opening, where he narrates to us the day him and Diego met Django. His personality is pretty likable, as though he is pretty loyal to Diego and cares for him like a brother, he will occasionally bust his chops in one form or another, which is pretty hilarious, but also helps Django get a better understanding of what it's like to be Zorro's partner. Now, before I get into this one, I must give a trigger warning since I will be mentioning both physical and sexual abuse. These subjects make you feel uncomfortable in any way, I'd recommend skipping to this time code. Alright, time to move on to our main antagonist, the Archduke of Arizona, who, as I mentioned, is a total son of a bitch. From when you first meet him, you see that he is a very cold and very calculating man, who cares only for his own wealth and legacy. we spend the entire second issue with him, learning how he became the most powerful man in Arizona, and it is just unsettling. The road he took to get where he is full of dead bodies and manipulation, with his greatest victims being his son Alaric and his second wife, Conchita, who was only a child when he met her, as she became fast friends with his son, and eventually found out that she could be used as a way to gain territory in Arizona. Yeah, pretty sure you know where this is going. Which led to him grooming her to be his bride as she came of age, regardless if she wanted to or not. And once that happened, all he did is treat her like an object. At one point even mentioning that he feels like at some point he will grow tired of her and pass her off. Yeah, a real scumbag. Along with that, he is also incredibly racist and openly dislikes it when people speak Spanish around him, despite the fact that the land he lived on was populated by a Spanish-speaking culture. He is a despicable villain, and you just cannot wait for Django and Zorro to face him and take him down. Finally, I'll discuss the Archduke's son and second wife, Conchita and Alaric. These two definitely are the emotional crux of the story, as we see these two just live their lives in fear of this man. While still trying to play the part of a loyal wife and son, Conchita especially trying to show at least some compassion to him, but instead he just treats her like a hindrance. In secret, desperately wants to be free of this, but fears what her husband will do to her if she tries to defy him in any way. All while Alaric is beaten down emotionally and is forced to follow his father's orders. And much like Conchita, he's trying to play the part as best as he can, but there are points where it just becomes a pain for him, especially since he has to watch the woman he loved marry this monster and deal with the worst of his actions. It's one of those tragic romances I wasn't expecting to see in the story, but I can't say it doesn't make it more powerful. The art was done by Stephen Poles, with colors done by Matt Wagner's son, Brennan Wagner. Really nails the gritty western vibe, while also blending a swashbuckling adventure that both these characters are known for. Poles captures Jamie Foxx's likeness pretty well drawing Django, and though I'm more a fan of the domino mask look than the full mask, I can't deny that Poles nailed Zorro's look as well, and the full mask does make Zorro look more intimidating. Then there's the expressions, that are just excellent, especially for someone like Bernardo who doesn't speak. Then we got the action, where the color really gets to shine. The best example being this fight scene at night. The use of yellow and red mixed with the darker colors like blues and blacks really captures that classic pulp hero vibe that you used to see in those stories. All around, well done. Django Zorro is definitely a must read. If you love Tarantino and can't wait to see his next big film, or just love Django and Zorro, then definitely check this book out. If this never gets a film, I gotta say Hollywood is seriously missing out. I recommend you don't do the same. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and though I didn't intend it, it seems that crossover month will be living up by its name as we cross over to next month as we finally discuss Rick and Morty D&D. Later.